Welcome to the third instalment of our State of the Sitcom series.
This week, we're excited to be joined by the hosts of Wine and Crime podcast with a rather raucous discussion covering a sitcom classic.
Thanks to everyone who's joined us on this journey through sitcoms past, present and future, and hit us up on Instagram and Twitter with your thoughts on the state of the sitcom.
And remember to tune in next week for episode 4 where we discuss a UK cult classic.
Judgecast.
Hello and welcome to...
I'm so sorry. I wasn't prepared for that.
I'll try again. Judgecast.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Judgecast, the State of the Sitcom specials with myself, Joe Bowden, and this guy,
Jay Taylor.
And this week we are joined by the wonderful hosts of Wine and Crime podcast. Hello!
Hello! Oh, hey there. Yeah.
Oh, hey, y'all.
Oh, geez. We have the pand.
How you doing?
We are very good. And so we've got, it's three of you. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Kenyon. I'm Lucy.
And I'm Amanda.
And you guys...
Yeah,
we're Wine and Crime.
We're Wine and Crime. So, Wine and Crime, we're a true crime comedy podcast, and our tagline is join three friends as they chug wine, chat true crime, and unleash their worst Minnesotan accents.
Oh, yeah, sure, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an amazing podcast. We love listening to it. You can find it on all the podcast places,
all the platforms,
all the places.
Yeah, we're everywhere.
You go into some pretty weird areas, like
necrophilia is not that weird. I don't know why people keep asking why necrophilia is weird. It's super not weird.
It was also
so
our
mainstream
first episode, though, so
cannibalism is not that weird. I don't know why people think cannibalism is so weird. It's not that weird.
It's a time-honored tradition.
People have got such a stick up, for these things. They're just normal, aren't they?
Maybe if they just tried it,
Yeah.
they wouldn't be so put off by it.
After a glass of wine, anything goes.
Right.
Wow.
Or
Pretty
six.
much. Yeah, so our show is pretty no holds barred. It's also super not safe for work. Definitely have your headphones tightly in while listening.
My favorite stories are when people are like, I was listening on the bus and my headphones came out and you were screaming like a hot dog down a hallway or something ridiculous. Everyone turns and stares at you. So, yeah, it's a risk.
Yeah.
Listen at your own risk. We have fun, though. So much fun.
Yeah.
It's the type of podcast that, it's when you're sitting on a bus or you're at work or in an office or something like that, and you will start going down an avenue and I just can't control myself. You realise that you're listening to something and you're so kind of involved, and then you just
realise where you are.
There was a recent story about a horse and a shallow grave. Yeah.
The Shallow Graves episode.
That one,
oh my God.
That killed me, that story. I just, in hysterics.
True story.
And people looking
at you.
People looking at you for
60
laughing.
Shallow Graves to know what we're talking about right now. But it's so worth it.
Again, necrophilia, shallow graves, they're fine. It's all good. Why are people so hung up on stuff?
We want to be having the conversations we know you and your friends are having about these things. That's really the whole point.
Yeah. We basically always had like very dark senses of humor and are really fascinated by really morbid oddities, weird stuff. So the podcast was born.
It.
And I think seeing like your interactions on social media and stuff and being part of those, everyone else seems to be as well. It doesn't seem like it's just you. We're all a little bit fascinated by dark, weird shit.
Oh,
yeah.
We all want to talk about
it.
Best. So it's a great way.
Stories.
It's a great way to let that out.
And to learn.
Let your freak flag fly.
Fly it proud.
And also drink your face off.
Yeah.
Well, in true Wine and Crime style, we are currently opening a bottle because why not? And we...
Hey!
Nice.
It's a
What
fruity little
combo.
Malbec, an Argentinian Malbec.
It's
So
it's an organic, I believe.
we've not gone too heavy because it's not that, it's middle
Do
of the
they use vegan farming practices?
afternoon.
I hope so.
That's a little hot button issue these days.
Oh yeah, sustainable, babe.
Yes.
But anyway,
Bless.
so for
So-
the state of the
anyone.
sitcom, we basically gave you free reign of what sitcom you wanted to talk about. We gave you a list of ideas. What did you choose?
We chose Frasier.
Oh, my
Amanda
God.
chose Frasier. It was unanimous, but Amanda definitely already was so obsessed with Frasier that it was a no-brainer on our end.
And
It had already become like an inside joke amongst the three of us.
I am so
began
excited.
when Frasier originally aired and then lasted throughout my lifetime. And then Kenyon was here last summer, and the three of us were hanging out, and we all went down to visit Lucy in Iowa. And I insisted that any downtime we had in Lucy's house was the home had to be filled with the sounds of like Niles Crane frantically puttering around his brother Frasier's home, following Daphne around. And then these two were like, you know what? Yeah, this is amazing.
Yeah.
This
And
is
they
good.
all,
How much I love this. Yeah.
I have a voicemail saved on my phone forever of Amanda at like 8 in the morning. We're all hungover. She called me to get me up for breakfast, and it's a
from the
voicemail
room
of
downstairs.
from downstairs. The voicemail is just the entire theme song.
Hey baby, I hear the blues
Who's
are calling.
Scrambled eggs.
We were using the entire song as a run-on sentence hashtag for photos on Instagram, and Instagram
Oh my god, I forgot
refused to
about that.
post the hashtag because it was so long.
Turns out there are
And it
limits.
took me like
Just-
45 minutes to write that out as a hashtag without any spelling mistakes or spaces or grammar or punctuation. And when it would post, I like actually cried. I was so drunk. We also found a really cool straw hat that weekend. That was a really good weekend.
It was a fantastic weekend.
That is the weekend of dreams, I think.
Yes. But that's why we chose Frasier. Sorry that took so
That
long.
was honestly a year ago. And then you reached out to us and gave us this list, and it was like, oh my god, Frasier.
I'm so glad. Like it's such a big part of my love of sitcoms. I watch it with an inordinate amount of frequency. I don't know what it is.
You went through a phase of like only going to sleep to the sounds of Frasier.
Just this marimba like.
We've all been there.
We have.
Oh,
Such a good pre-bed show. It's so like calming. Because
Yeah.
there's never actually any
Like,
real
real
drama or like, the stakes are very low.
They're coming from a position of high privilege. They're never
Yeah.
going to fall that hard.
They're gonna be fine. Yeah.
So, I mean, what was your first exposure to Freddy? Like, you Amanda said you kind of had it through your whole life, and like,
yeah. My parents watched Cheers, and then when Frasier aired, they loved it. And I definitely grew up in a privileged home with like, all of the trappings of a well-off and well-to-do family. And my dad worked in the wine industry. So he always got such a kick out of the show because he and my mom were like raised very blue collar and were very down to earth, but they had to like hobnob with all of these hoity-toity winemakers and whatnot because my dad was like a VP of marketing for a pretty high-end wine and spirits distribution company at the time. So they would travel all over the place, and they would kind of behind the scenes poke fun at people that were like Frasier and Niles. But there are a lot of people in the wine industry in particular who are just like them in every way. So I feel like it always just kind of connected, especially with my parents. And they enjoyed it so much that then it was fun for me to watch because they were cracking up. And I didn't even know, like, I was really young. So I had no idea what was so funny about it. And then revisiting it later, I was like, oh, yeah, this is fucking genius. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Are we allowed to swear? We're allowed to swear, yeah?
Oh, fuck yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Good answer.
Yeah, I've gone back and looked at it and sort of like, I don't understand what I got from this the first time around, because I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have got any of these jokes.
Oh,
But yeah,
It's
there's
weird.
a lot of physical comedy too, though.
Yeah.
Which
Oh, yeah.
like that defies any age bracket. I mean, David Hyde Pierce, for everything that is kind of shitty about him in real life, I've heard, he is a brilliant
ruin him for
comedian.
me.
Like, you just can't deny it.
Is it 3 Valentines episode where he's
Yes,
ironing the
where he
trousers?
burns his pants. Oh,
It's.
The irony.
I thought we were going to get to that later, but we're coming straight out of it.
straight out the gates.
so
Yeah.
good. It's so.
Like-
Didn't he win an Emmy just for that scene? Like, wasn't there some special category of a comedic short or something, and they pulled it? I could be making this up completely.
I want it to be true.
I love the idea you've just dreamed it. Yeah.
Yeah, he should have.
He
It's
should have
written.
done.
It exists on the internet.
I'll give him a posthumous. No, he's not dead, is he?
No, he's not dead.
His career.
His career might be.
Oh, it definitely is. That is accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching it growing up, and I was an only child of a single parent, so I was kind of always hanging out with the adults and the grown-ups, and that was normal for me to try to understand the conversation and the jokes and keep up at the adult table. So yeah, I remember my mom loving Frasier and us watching it together, and I don't feel like so much of it went over my head. I mean, definitely some of the literary references, I'm sure, did, but I remember thoroughly enjoying it as a kid and then revisiting it recently thanks to Amanda.
You're welcome. I've brought so much into your life.
We all have a lot to thank Amanda for. I mean, but it's kind of weird because I think that's something that I wanted to touch on. Is I think people think it's this highbrow snooty sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
It somehow got put in that bracket, but it's really base a lot of the time. There's a lot of scat. There's a lot of toilet humor.
Yes.
All the time. There's physical comedy. There's relationship comedy. There's a lot
it's
of
the setting that makes people feel like it's going to
the
be
psychiatry.
Yeah.
And I think it's supposed to be making fun of a lot of that highbrow bullshit because it's ridiculous. Just the way that Frasier communicates with people is so absurd. And there are people who exist who act like that, who talk down their nose to everyone, and it just looks insane.
I was watching an episode last night just because I haven't seen it since last summer when Amanda forced it on all of us.
I will never live this summer down.
And not the straw hat part in particular. But I was trying to remember what the premise was because I went through my Frasier phase for sure, in maybe early high school. I remember coming home and I don't know who was drugging us in high school, but I was just tired all of the time.
Yeah.
And I'd come home from school and watch The Simpsons, and then Seinfeld was on after that, and then Frasier was on after that.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I heard the sounds of Frasier, I would obviously I had fallen asleep at that point. It'd be like, oh my God, my parents are home now. My mom's gonna come get me for dinner soon. So it was sort of I a little bit associate it with dread.
Oh my God.
Oh, I was over here you're cozy on the couch and soon you're gonna have dinner and you're dread.
Yeah.
Well, it's waking up from a nap. Yeah, I don't know. And you're just crabby all the time in high school. Tired and crabby.
It's a
The
difficult
Lucy
time.
Fitzgerald story. But anyway, I was watching it again last night and I was trying to remember what are these accents? Everyone has a different weird accent. Where did these people come from? And the dad's a crass old man with an ugly recliner, and they're
I love Marty Crane.
Oh.
and they're kind of British, but their accent isn't really British. It's just straight pretension.
Mm-hmm.
That's what their accent is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not I don't think there are any actual people who speak like Frasier and Niles in the real world. I don't think.
I don't think so either.
Except our friend Scott.
And it's
I was
Not
like
that,
there
does he?
definitely are.
it's like psychiatrists
God.
wandering around in Shakespearean times and pronouncing things
A
to the room
boom.
when they. But
Yeah.
it's
It's just
definitely
an
affected my
air.
vocabulary though. I think sometimes I say things and I'm like, that feels like something that I've picked up from Frasier.
Your pretension.
Yeah. So sometimes I just go, what did I just say? What was that?
That's
The
amazing.
show definitely introduced me to different terms for coffee
Yes.
as a young child because my mom hates coffee. She won't drink it. She can't stand the smell of it. And so we grew up like without a coffee maker. Like it was pre-Starbucks explosion. So
Straight up.
yeah, I remember like being like kind of curious, like what is a cappuccino?
This mysterious drink that
From another world.
It introduced
And now
me to
I'm
the
like
idea.
addicted.
It introduced me to the idea of seasoning a crepe pan. Like, what?
Oh
Who
my
Oh
seasons
my
God.
a
god, I
pan?
literally just watched season 7 and you are
Yeah.
citing like everything.
Yes.
Like, it's weird. Like, I never knew that this was a thing that you had to season a pan, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's. Is that a
Crepes
thing?
and cast iron, baby.
Saucepans
Gotta
in
season it.
summer, crepe pans in fall.
Yeah.
When winter comes, there's food for us all.
Yeah.
beautiful.
Oh
my God.
It's a very quotable show.
Lucy hates us so much right now.
I'm just coloring.
It's I mean, as a sitcom, so you're obviously American, so it's the kind of birthplace of sitcoms, and I find this one interesting because it is obviously the sequel to Cheers. Is it?
Yeah.
A spin-off.
Spin-off. Yeah.
It's a spin-off.
So, like, in terms of what else you were watching, so I don't know, like what other sitcoms you were watching. You talked about The Simpsons. Obviously, at the time there was like Roseanne. There was
Friends and
Seinfeld.
Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Seinfeld was big.
Mm-hmm.
but like,
Mhm.
what sets Frasier apart in terms of
From all
that
those others.
for you as American viewers? Because obviously, as a British perspective, we've got a very different outlook on. Yeah, like I think for us, they all came over at once. Like as we were children in the late 80s, early 90s, and so there was just this wave of like Fresh Prince, Frasier, Friends,
Yeah. Well,
and like
I feel like we were in kind of the glory days of transition of sitcoms at this time because I don't know how many Frasier fans or Seinfeld fans are on this call right now, but when Seinfeld first aired, it was not well received. People didn't understand the humor. It was almost canceled after the first 2 seasons, I believe.
Niche.
Yeah.
Super
Well,
New
it is-
York and niche.
Yeah. And
It's
so,
a show about nothing, you know.
exactly. It literally is. And the humor was dark and it had some of that like weird balance between some physical comedy. So honestly, there is some highbrow humor in Seinfeld.
Yeah.
That
They're just making
people-
fun of the rest of the world.
Exactly. So
That's why
I
I
feel
loved it.
like that was a really big time to be ushering in shows like Frasier where they could follow a similar trope but turn it on its head.
yeah,
And I feel like Frasier kind of jumped in off the coattails of a beloved show. Like Americans fucking love Cheers.
yeah,
Like Sam and Diane was like the original love story. We wouldn't have Friends, which I hate, if we didn't have Cheers. Like we wouldn't have so many different shows
yeah.
if Cheers had not paved the way for that to happen. So I feel like it was a natural next step for Frasier to hitch their wagon to the Cheers star and then kind of come out in the same era as Seinfeld and be able to combine like all of the nostalgic love of Cheers to launch this thing in this like new era of sitcom.
Yeah.
And I think it just did it really, really well. And I think it was received faster than Seinfeld was, but then it's almost like the two helped each other skyrocket because then people were like, you know what, I do get it. And this is really funny. That's what I think sets it apart. I mean, Roseanne is like,
I
was
never
never-
watched it.
no, it was
Yeah.
sort of the 90s version of All in the Family with like Archie Bunker
Yeah.
and, you know, sort of the like super middle to lower class glimpse at a family. And
Or like Love and what's it? The Love and Marriage.
Yeah,
Married
yeah.
with Children.
Married with Children.
Married with
Yeah.
Children.
I used to watch that.
Yeah.
yeah, and these are great shows. They just were, I feel like they were a little bit tired. Like they were still repeating some of the same things that these like old school sitcoms from the 50s had taught them to do.
Definitely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I
what.
kind of thought they were sad.
They were
They
so
just
sad.
kind of made me sad. Also, I grew up like not well off, and struggled financially, and so then kind of seeing that it's not what I wanted to watch on TV.
Yeah.
I literally was not allowed to watch Married with Children.
No, I wasn't either.
Really?
Yeah, it was forbidden.
Yeah.
Well,
We didn't
it's
have
about
such rules in the Jacobson house.
I used to watch it. I don't know how, because it's not very much a UK show. But I used to watch it, and it is essentially about a grumpy old guy who just wants to sit with his hand down his trousers. I can understand why you wouldn't want your kids watching that.
Yeah, right.
Well, and it's just there were so many. I think Frasier was such an interesting show because there were so many sitcoms at the time that were, we're going to use some buzzwords right now, but we're very like patriarchal and about just men being the head of the household and women being, subservient to them, and men bossing women around and women just being like, oh, Hank, you're so funny, blah, blah, blah. And then in come Frasier and Niles, who are just so far removed from the Archie Bunkers of the time.
Yeah.
They just reinvent masculinity because they're both straight. And them being straight is key to the show.
Yes.
But they're completely
vulnerable in a lot of ways, and they're manic, and they're intellectual, and they go to the opera and they drink sherry, and I think that Marty Crane was the answer to how do we bring in the regular Joes of the world.
How do we make this
in
relatable?
Such a brilliant way.
The juxtaposition.
Yes, bring in this like ex-cop, not macho, but like curmudgeonly man who can be the one to be like, you two are fucking ridiculous. My sweet little sissy sons. And like, yes, there are some things that don't really hold up these days. It's pretty homophobic, and like the masculinity is a little bit like fragile because it's a constant. We're making fun of these men who are not acting like men; they're acting like women, and they must be gay and blah blah blah. Like that whole thing is just kind of silly and dumb.
From Marty, it was still kind of a light touch, and it was still from like a place of love.
Yeah, I think
and they would use those moments to teach a little bit about how men can be different and men can express themselves in different ways, and it doesn't make you any less of a man.
Yeah.
The subtext is there if you want to see it. I don't think it was that overt in showing it, but I think I think that's interesting also that these two, particularly like Frasier and Niles, I'd say are the leads.
Yeah.
And that they're supposed to be these like they're so well educated and they know all these different things, but they're socially totally clueless.
Just awful.
And so it was a way to sort of that was a fault, I guess. Really, it was a way of being able to kind of like understand that nobody is really got an idea of what's going on in the world. There's always something that we don't understand.
But I think it's really like you touched upon certain things don't stand up well in time. But we've rewatched some Friends for the State of the Sitcom as well. The difference in the homophobic in that is horrible. It's
watching
really
that is really uncomfortable.
Like I can't watch that show.
It's really
Friends is awful.
Yeah,
like, in my opinion.
Whereas
I grew up watching and loving Friends, but I haven't tried to rewatch it. I'm a little bit scared.
I didn't grow up watching and loving Friends, so I didn't have that nostalgic attachment to it.
Yeah,
and
I didn't watch it either.
I tried to rewatch it, and I was just like, none of this is funny. These people are assholes, and they're all just making fun of each other for stupid shit.
But I think they're assholes. Whereas I think Frasier and Niles, like we just saw, I think it's the end of season 1, and there's a bit where Niles says, "Oh wow, that guy's good looking," and Frasier turns to him and goes, "Oh well, that suddenly must," and he says, "What does that mean?" And he goes, "Oh, obviously it means you're gay, man," and it's actually. It's not as homophobic. It actually kind of addresses things, and throughout the show, there's obviously
just taking the piss and saying, because you can appreciate the attractiveness of one man must mean that you're gay,
which is what
and taking the piss out of him.
Like,
exactly.
Oh, I guess you must be gay, but he's not saying, oh, like you're some sort of homo because you think that guy is a handsome.
Yeah, there was
person.
no judgment there. It was just like, don't be an idiot. It's okay for you to see that somebody's attractive.
But that's what a lot of people would have thought at the time. Is if you call a man attractive, you're instantly
Oh, for sure.
Insta-gay. Just add water.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Instant.
Jesus.
Also, like the character of Roz. Is quite for the
I
time.
identify with Roz so hard.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of slut shaming toward Roz, but I also do think that they do it in a similar way, in that, like you said, in that taking a piss way.
Yeah.
Because it's like they set it up so that she has the opportunity to say, you know what, no, fuck you.
Mm.
I'm living my life the way I want to live it. Yes. And there are definitely some like very antiquated moments where she's like, the woe is me, I'm never going to have a husband. Like when she's trying to sleep with Frasier, and like, I feel like there were moments where the writers were like, but we can't have a feminist on this show, so we have to loop this back.
Let's
to
write ourselves into a corner.
Men.
Yeah.
Or just like some tired writing moments. Kind of.
For sure.
Yeah.
But Ross is freaking brilliant. I love her.
I always appreciated that she was a single mom on television.
Yes.
Which then Friends also did kind of briefly.
Sort of.
I think
not really.
Both Rachel and Roz ended up getting married, though, eventually.
But I think
for a while, though, Roz was a single mom.
Yeah.
Rose was a single mom, and she's successful. Through the entire series, she's a successful radio producer.
She has her life together.
She's
and it was
far
a
more together than
picture of men treating women in the workplace like second-class citizens, and her saying, "No, I'm not going to take this lying down." You know. And I think a lot of like the funny banter between her and Bulldog was a great representation of like, oh, this is. Every office has this motherfucker. And Roz was not having it. And it was so great to watch that play out, where it wasn't just a woman lying down and accepting that there's going to be a bulldog in every professional situation. Like, you don't have to put up with that shit.
Right down to the naming of his character, really, is like, you know, it's kind of vicious the way he acts. And so then being able to sort of show that and show that she can handle him and totally put him in his place. The whole bit where they slept together, that doesn't fit.
No.
It doesn't work.
Right.
But
again, and I think that comes back to there are moments in Frasier, as with any long running sitcom, where they just obviously write themselves into a corner and start going, we're gonna have to get someone to sleep with, like they almost can't commit to, we can just write a funny episode without any big arc happening, and sometimes they get a bit, obviously the ratings are dipping, so if we get Frasier and Niles Niles to sleep with Lilith and stuff like
that was dumb.
I hated that storyline.
It's just weird. I mean, there's some funny laughs later in the show when they do, like, there's a couple of kind of callbacks to, and when Martin finds out that Niles slept with it, like that's funny, but you can just tell that at the time they were.
Well, and it also irritated me because it didn't make sense. It wouldn't have happened.
No.
Right.
It's not something that in like the story arc and the relationship that Niles had with Lilith and the relationship that Niles had with Frasier, it just wouldn't have happened. It didn't make sense. It was like purely for shock.
Yeah. I
was like, do better. This is stupid.
I think
it was almost like they were trying to eke out the Niles and Daphne not getting together as long as they could.
Really stretch it,
Well, I often find, particularly with sitcoms, but with all dramas as well, particularly with the old format where it's 24 episodes a season, and you've got the format itself has got its own pressures of, you've got to make this many episodes. It's got to keep being more successful every season, and the studio wants to order another season all the time, so they can't ever have the resolution that feels natural in the characters, because if they'd got Niles and Daphne together earlier, people probably, there was a lot made of that whole will they won't they thing. And so the studios and people will turn off.
I mean, that was fun. It was fun for viewers, and the way they stretched it out, for the most part, I think was good, because
it worked.
It was just these very little hints, you know, or keeping Daphne oblivious, I think.
And
worked.
Niles the character of Niles was so good at being like this insanely in love. Like, some of it I'm like, okay, buddy, this is a little bit creepy.
He was total creep.
It wouldn't stand still.
Smelling her, like, oh god.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was better. It was better than like some shows where it's like both characters are aware, but like external forces get in the way, or a miscommunication, and they don't talk about it, and then they don't get, that
unrealistic
gets
stuff
old really fast. And Frasier didn't do that, which was good.
I think
refreshing.
The strongest part for me is that when they finally get together, they don't have this idyllic relationship. They actually show that, you know what, even if you get with your goddess, whatever you call the person, or whoever is your ideal person, you have to make it work. And I thought that was really powerful to see on screen, of actually you can really damage someone by being this kind of obsessive lover.
Putting them on a pedestal.
Whereas in
it's unhealthy.
So much in films.
It makes it impossible to live up to those standards for your partner.
Whereas in, like, you know, a lot of Disney films and that kind of thing, that's how the romantic lead should act. Like, I will be this obsessive.
Right.
It's
in relationships, like, getting together is not where the story ends. It's where the story starts. So all the, like, interesting shit that is the mundane, how you deal with every day, and what life throws at you is actually what the story is, not just all the cat and mouse that leads up to it.
Yeah.
So I agree. I really like that they actually did address that after the fact, and, like, continued that story going with some conflict there.
Yeah, I think they did that really, but they resolved it really well. Like,
and then Daphne in real life got pregnant, and they just fat shamed her for a season, and I was like, "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" Because she can't just be pregnant on the show.
No, it's like there's a lot of hangovers from Cheers, some which work. You know, like the whole Diane and Sam thing is kind of similar to the Frasier.
Well, it is, and it isn't. That they've kind of did the thing where they both knew about it.
Yeah.
Like they'd written that story, so they wanted to try it in a different way. I guess.
But they knew that the kind of will they, won't they thing worked. They like the whole Norm's wife and Maris, like, never seeing them, so they can make
a picture of that character in your head that feels so clear, but recently go, I've never actually seen that person.
It makes the jokes all the more funnier. Because,
that's amazing.
Yeah, so good.
But then you have the things that don't work, which is like the Kirstie Alley fat shaming.
Yep.
And then they obviously did it again and going, oh, people really like this. No, we don't. Why do you have to constantly have this on every sitcom? There's always seems to be.
Yeah.
I feel like we were not as evolved of humans then.
No, not even.
And I feel like people thought it did work. I mean, I don't think they should have thought that. Also, I was a child, so I'm, claiming ignorance.
It was also just how those shows worked at the time.
Yeah.
Like, it had been.
Yeah, it was just so accepted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And progress is gradual, as we know. So, they kind of were taking it one step at a time, but, like, women still had to be the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
To make everybody watching
they really were.
feel comfortable.
There were a lot. I mean, think about, like, how many dates, how many just, like, character actresses were paraded through that show, and each one of them, same with Seinfeld, each one of them had, like, a flaw or a foible.
Yeah.
And
that made it impossible for them to be loved.
Yeah, the character of Poppy, like, talked too much, or even I thought Lilith was treated really unfairly. It was funny.
Yeah, justice for Lilith, definitely. I love her. I think she's a great character, and I think that she was totally, like, she could have had a much bigger role, and they could have written her so much better.
She's so funny, and that actress is so deadpan and amazing.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So
what the bit I can never understand is she's stunning, and yet the jokes were always about how dour and cold, and it's like, are you seeing the same? Because she's
right.
Is it Baby Newworth is
absolutely gorgeous.
Totally.
Like, there was all these jokes.
Are they being ironic? I don't understand.
I think it's possible that they were a little bit, but it's also, again, it's still piggybacking off of these, like, her character existed on Cheers.
Yeah.
Right.
So a lot of the people watching Frasier knew her from Cheers. Obviously, she was gorgeous and wonderful on Cheers too, but that was already an established running joke. Yeah. So it's really hard to go back on that and then all of a sudden shape her into a completely different character. Right.
I'm going to ask you that really hard question now. Then, does Frasier surpass Cheers?
I think it does.
I mean, I think it's, given our age, I barely remember Cheers. Like, I know that I watched it, but I was so little that I really don't remember it very well. And I definitely didn't understand all the jokes.
It's just a fresher audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I always enjoyed, I don't think I would rewatch Cheers. I don't know what I would get out of it, but I am very much enjoying rewatching Frasier.
I would 100% agree.
I think Frasier's a bit more relatable. There's a sadness that comes with Cheers of, you're watching a bunch of alcoholics.
Yeah.
And underneath all of that, it's like, wow, this is still it's a really dark shit. However, Cheers was huge in our house. Like the last episode of Cheers being on telly was a family event. Now we are not a family that kind of all likes the same telly. So sitting down to watch something together was kind of quite rare.
Yeah.
So for Cheers finale was like, this is huge, and it was but then I feel like Frasier just took it to a whole new stratosphere as such. Cheers was a thing, and it was a phenomenon, but I think Frasier, I personally believe Frasier did it better.
I think it's also
Frasier's, it's quicker, like it's so the jokes are so quick and witty, and I thought Cheers was much more like leaving lots of time for laughs.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think it's a different kind of humor.
For sure. It's less nuanced.
Yeah. And I think
and less intellectual.
I think a lot of it has to do with the cast of Cheers was a lot bigger. It did that whole kind of, as you say, the old style thing where there's a bit from everyone. Whereas it really is Frasier mainly about the six. Like most episodes, there's very rarely where you don't have all of them in it. And it's all centered around their relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, you get a little bit where Bulldog and Gil start coming in, but it's very rare. Like, it's actually
very ancillary.
But you remember them being in it a lot more, whereas actually they're only in like very few episodes. But I think that really makes it a much tighter show, and that's why the jokes are much quicker, because those actors all work off each other amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
and you already have like such full context for each of these characters that they can just say, I just feel like the characters for the most part were like very coherent.
Yeah.
It's like you knew like what kind of pajamas Niles was gonna wear.
Yes.
If you imagined him leaving Frasier's apartment, going home and going to bed, like they were so well constructed.
Yeah. It's
I agree.
That's from the first episode. We rewatched the pilot, and they do it. I don't know if you've seen it recently to remember, but they incrementally introduce each character and each aspect. So they'll have like a scene with Frasier at work, and then Roz will say, "Your brother left a message," and then you've got the next segment, the brother. And then in that conversation, they'll mention their dad, and then you've got the father. Yeah. And it's
smart. I thought it was so smart.
It's so clever.
The structure of it is absolutely perfect, spot on, because you're being led through. It's not like remember this person and look at this person. It's just a very natural familial engagement between them, and they are, as you say, like so in those characters. They're so well rounded. You instantly feel that there is a history there. It's I think it's brilliantly done, that pilot. I love it.
So good.
Just makes me want to watch more of it now.
I know. Like, we wrap this up.
We'll just have like a Skype call while we all watch it together. Like,
just giggling.
Beautiful plan.
I'll fall asleep instantly.
It genuinely did become like a, what's it called, where you have the fallopian tube? No, Pavlovian response.
What?
Fallopian tube.
I am definitely going to be referring to Pavlov as fallopian response from now on. I'm studying him in psych right now.
I only got a C in science, all right?
Fallopian dog.
When I'm on my period and need chocolate, I'm going to call that a fallopian response.
100%.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. That's
Sorry.
so perfect. You're the only guy on this call. We gotta tease you a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just getting
especially when you utter the word fallopian.
If anyone had bets on who was going to say fallopian first, I don't think they thought it was going to be.
I would have been on Amanda.
Yeah.
I mean, typically me, so I'm shocked it was you.
Always going on about fallopian tubes.
Yeah.
I could try it in my Minnesota accent. Fallopian.
That was like North Carolina.
Yeah,
I don't know what that
yeah.
was. But I love it. It's an O. It's a long O. Fallopian.
Fallopian.
There it is. Nailed it.
I think we can slow down on the wine this time.
So one of the questions that we've asked about a lot of these shows, because, you know, sitcoms, as much as I think we're in a great period for sitcoms now, a lot of the ones you think of when someone asks you about a sitcom are from either the 70s or the 90s. Like, there was a real key thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is Frasier still relevant? Like, would it work either watching it now as a fresh audience or as a kind of Will and Grace,
Reboot.
you know, how they've rebooted and kind of brought the characters back? Or do
So
you...
my answer on that is split. So I think rewatching it now, I was surprised at how, yes, the set is dated, and yes, like the hairstyles and the clothes are all dated,
So
but
much.
the jokes really aren't. For the most part. I mean, mostly what they're referencing are things that are pretty timeless, like fine wine and, you know, people having big egos and brothers.
Bad communication issues.
Yeah,
that's like the crux of
competing with each
everything.
other.
Yeah.
I think it's totally suitable for a reboot.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, they're just it's commenting on each other's foibles. And what's more timeless than that?
Well, that's where my answer splits, because I think like the jokes totally hold up and actually are like fairly timeless, but it's such a 90s show overall.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't think it would reboot very well.
Here's my take on
I don't
this.
know that there's a place for it anymore.
We are in such a fucking renaissance of all things 90s right now.
Yeah.
Everything from the 90s is coming back in full force. And I recently rewatched Will and Grace because I loved that show. And I really enjoyed it, though, like, for such a groundbreaking show, that show had its own issues too, with their own like homophobic and transphobic crap. But that was just like such a thing of the 90s that while it makes me sound like a super privileged, like shitty cis white woman, it's like we can forgive it because it was a different time. But like it really was a different time, and we can still take some of the advances that shows like Will and Grace and like Frasier made and acknowledge that they weren't perfect, because they weren't.
No.
Yeah.
But then I started
shows that are out now that seem super woke.
20 years from now, we're going to have the same comment.
Yeah.
And then I was sad that I was binged through Will and Grace and it was over. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to check out the reboot. And it is a train wreck. It is so bad.
No.
I hate it. I hate it. I watched 3-4 episodes and I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's a mess. And so I think that just because everyone's doing it doesn't mean you should necessarily do it. Like, some things just have to remain pure and nostalgic. And I, as a child primarily of the 90s, I love that so much popular culture stuff from the 90s is coming back. I think it's so great.
Yeah.
But nostalgia alone is not enough to carry good quality media, period.
Absolutely.
It's just not.
Yeah.
So if you
Also,
can't
I
do it,
think
don't do it.
Kelsey Grammer is like actually a douchebag.
Oh,
He's a
God.
horrible monster.
Yeah.
And I think more
Real
people.
Housewife, and
Yeah, exactly. So I think more people know that about him, and so the whole like lovable egotist thing isn't going to play anymore when you're actually a horrible monster egotist.
Yeah. That's a really good point, mate.
The thing that I was thinking is, or if they recast them and made them the same age as they were in the 90s, but now, what I can't get my head around is what would Frasier and Niles look like in 2018? Because, like, not as in physically, I mean, like, that kind of post-yuppie era is so dead and unfashionable.
They'd probably be like, millennials.
Yeah.
They could make them like a little bit younger than what they were in the show, more like 20s and 30s hipsters, and poke fun at that. I don't think I'd watch it because I get so pissed off about all the millennial shaming. But
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But it just wouldn't be the same without those like triangular, baggy, tailored suits.
I
mean, like 3-button, like almost a zoot suit, but not quite style suit of the 90s.
I feel a bit bad for them. They spent so much money on those suits and they look fucking awful.
If you're not drowning in it, I don't want to see it.
Slapsack.
Also, Frasier's hair in those first couple. I don't.
Oh my God!
How did anyone walk out of the house? I don't understand it.
It's like a sheet of wind thing behind him. I don't get it.
It was so
a little bit Trumpian.
It was so wispy, and like you could clearly see through it, and like the light would catch it.
Yeah,
it's
so distracting. It looked like you woke up brushed his teeth, stuck a wet finger in a light socket, put a baggy suit on, and went to work. I was like, I would put change in your coffee cup because I would assume you're homeless. You're supposed to be like the elite of Seattle. Like, what the fuck is happening here?
Doesn't that happen?
I find those earlier episodes more difficult to watch because he looks so bad. Like, as soon as he cuts his hair, I watch loads of them.
I have a theory that, like, that is a pure, unadulterated Kelsey Grammer bitch move of him, like, not wanting to be styled. And he's like, no, motherfucker, I am this elite, and this is how I wear my hair, and I'm just gonna do it. And then the ratings came in after season 1, and his producers and director were like, you need to look at these comments. We are reining in this fucking hair. And then he had to roll over and accept it.
You need to be some form of attractiveness.
Yeah, we've got to believe that these women will actually go out with you.
You're going to be on billboards.
Attractive about Kelsey Grammer.
Not even a little bit.
No.
It's
He has very short teeth and a wide mouth.
Your forehead, and I'm speaking as someone with a crepe pan of a forehead, and he's still
Five head.
Yeah,
it's all the head.
Literally looks like Mr. Toad from Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Yes.
He is a living Mr. Toad.
Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Whatever that stupid book is.
That
Frog
classic.
and Toad.
Frog and Toad. Whatever. There's a Wild Ride in there somewhere.
Porn spin-off.
I'm 30. I haven't read a children's book in a while, except for Harry Potter.
Yeah, really. Says the biggest Harry Potter fan ever.
Yeah.
Okay, but Harry Potter isn't like 4 pages long with like a finger puppet inserted in the center of the book. So
This sounds like a different type of book.
Acceptable. I don't know what kind of books you're reading.
Are you buying?
I think the frog and toad analogy really fits in with the Frasier thing because, like, they were also normalizing sensitive masculinity.
But I think that weren't they actually supposed to be a couple?
No,
they weren't brothers.
They were friends.
They were just friends.
They were neighbors.
Yeah,
having adventures, having a good time.
Don't sully Frog and Toad with your
I'm
gauge.
not sullying it.
Okay, this this is definitely an American-only reference. We have literally no idea what you're talking about. We're just going, who?
I've also never.
God, that's
also,
amazing.
You guys did go quiet for a couple minutes.
I've also never fingered a book. Like, what is this thing?
God.
You have like a puppet in the book. No, it's not a sex thing, Jay.
Oh, right.
It's like a thing with a puppet, so that you can be like touch it and it's plushy and it's like for babies.
Yeah, you thought my finger puppet book was a sex thing?
I don't know.
Easily.
Get your fallopian tubes away from me.
I'm sorry.
It's wholesome fun.
This escalated in a very weird direction.
It always does.
Yeah, we do this.
Well, talking about what you do, this is our very interesting wine and crime question. Now, quite a lot. There's a few episodes which feature some form of criminal storyline, detective storyline. Which is your favourite crime storyline or detective storyline in Frasier?
Oh my god. Oh my god.
I feel like this is only for Amanda. Like, this is kind of like deep.
Yeah, because I would struggle to remember. I mean, as you're thinking, I just love Marty talking on the phone with his retired cop buddies all the time.
Duke.
Oh, yeah.
Love it.
Which, do you ever see Duke on camera, or is he another character that you never see?
I don't think you ever see him.
You never see Duke.
Yeah.
There's a few you don't see.
I feel like I vaguely remember. Didn't they like think they saw something through their telescope at another building?
I think there's one where
like a little rear window moment.
Yeah,
it's like
definitely did.
Blood on the floor.
Escalating, but I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of like true crime in there. I think one of my favorite sort of, I mean, it's not crimey, but like one of my favorite conflicts in there was always between Frasier and his upstairs neighbor, who are always trying to one up each other, and then Marty is like porking his upstairs neighbor's mom, and it like just blows their mind. But I mean, as true crimey as that gets, is like them taking it to the fucking condo board and like pissing all over each other. But
didn't Daphne have a bunch of relatives or maybe brothers
Yeah.
who were like a little
All
bit
criminals.
sketchy?
Oh, they were definitely
like fell off the back of a truck kind of stuff.
They're actually played by
Peppered in there.
they're actually played by massive British thespians. So you've got Robbie Coltrane, who's Hagrid.
Yeah.
Richard E. Grant, who's Withnail.
They're like really well
They're really well respected British people, and they all came on just playing these fucking like.
And can I just say,
football outs.
for the record, as somebody, because I went to uni in Manchester, which is where they all allegedly come from, that is A, not a Mancunian accent, not any of them did.
I'm
B,
sorry.
also, I feel bad for all the people from Manchester. They are not represented well. I know it's a very working class
It was
city,
like
but
this
still.
weird, like
They're all
Cockney
criminals.
cartoon version.
Hello,
of British.
Frasier.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
here to see Daphne. It's like,
Oh,
what
sister.
is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry I wasn't better at answering that question. Again, I just have to go rewatch Frasier again for like the 18th time now.
Well, because we always read off the episodes where they did that they brought back the Crane Boys.
The Crane Boys detectives.
And they would do like
Oh my god!
from their childhood, and then they'd like pick up a new case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
When
they
they go back to their childhood home and they're ripping up the floors,
And they-
I love that episode.
That's the one we were
Love that
thinking of.
episode. And they find the freaking
The-
fake skull,
the skull,
that Niles
yeah.
used to play Hamlet, and they're convinced that it's from an actual dead body under the.
Like, these are trained doctors. They went to
God.
medical school. They must know what an actual skull looks like.
Yeah.
Well, and that episode always cracked me up too because the flashbacks are of them as like 10
years.
to 15 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you would remember
Yeah. This is
I
not a thing you forget.
remember
This is my
being
skull.
8 years old with all the boys in my neighborhood daring each other to dig holes in the woods and poop in them. So you would remember
Sorry. That's
playing
quite a
with
memory.
the Hamlet skull at like 11 years old in your childhood home.
You
Yeah.
and Niles had a very similar childhood.
We really did. Pretty much the same.
Pooping in the walls. What?
Oh yeah,
That's
in the woods. Like we would go out
Not in the wall.
Oh, I had walls.
Joe misheard.
like into the forest
in the
and
In
dig
the
holes in the ground and dare each other to poop in them.
I don't think I'd be
Okay.
I
friends with a man
always
that pooped
delivered.
in the walls.
I mean, I'm visiting you soon. You don't know what I'm like.
I've got concrete walls. How
Yeah.
about it?
I can dig
It's-
Pressure and time.
Yeah. Pressure plus time equals execution.
I feel like all of your research around kind of, crimes and crime scenes and stuff would help you be able to poo in a wall and not have it found. I think
Oh, 100%.
you would be.
And get away with
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
I'm like the poop burglar.
And these poor people would just be like, why does it still smell of shit?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it is
Have
a
so
goal
many
of mine. My calling card, if I were to become a burglar, would definitely be to take what is affectionately called an upper decker in all of the toilets in a home that I rob. And for our UK listeners, an upper decker is when you take the lid off of the tank of the toilet and you poo in the tank, and then you put the lid back on,
So they
and
can't.
it
That-
goes unnoticed for way too long.
Oh my god, I've never heard of that, and that's really
It's
traumatizing.
brilliant, wouldn't you say?
This is why the situation in America is like it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Because there is
upper
such a
decker
thing as an
is
upper decker.
Yeah. Sorry about it.
Oh my
It's,
god.
Can we also apologize on behalf of the president that we did not vote for to everyone that is sees right now?
Dear
We didn't
God.
want this. Most of us don't want this, just so you know.
Most of us don't want this.
This is not a
Secretly,
good
don't
representation.
want this.
We know
I
I
because
would
Hillary
fill
won the
my
popular
walls
vote.
with poop if it would get rid of him.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
I feel like we
Just yeah.
wouldn't have had you on if you.
Yeah. If we felt differently.
Making sure.
Just like
Make sure
listening.
we're all
Yeah.
in agreement.
I can
It's,
also.
it's an ongoing joke that Kenyon voted for Donald Trump.
I
We bring
did
it up as often as possible,
not.
and it legitimately enrages her. And it's
The
hilarious.
worst. It's not a joke. It's just torture. It's just a prank.
It's hilarious.
This is vote shaming. I mean, come on.
I mean, in the spirit of both Easter and April Fool's Day, Kenyon voted for Trump.
Can you stop?
He's risen.
Well, a little bit of UK trivia that might make it a little bit easier. The word Trump in certain parts of the UK means fart. So that's a nice thing.
How did we not know this until now?
Are you serious?
Yeah, so you'd be like, if you fart, you'd be like, I just trumped.
Right, well, if he runs for re-election, I'm voting for him again with this knowledge. Because
It does make headlines.
2020 is pretty
2020. I need it.
It does make headlines quite enjoyable at times.
Oh, that is amazing. Love it so much. Well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
We needed that. America needed that.
Yeah, it was a good pick-me-up.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, in a roundabout way, we can go back to Frasier on. It never really touched on that kind of stuff. Like, I think
It didn't.
there was a couple of episodes, like you had the one where Marty was voting for the Republican and Niles and Frasier backed the Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way around. I think that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would imagine, yeah.
They kind of kept politics out of it.
They
for
really
sure.
did, and
Yeah.
I think as you said earlier on, like that kind of helps because a lot of the time with a sitcom, you do want funny, comforting, and warm. You don't necessarily want. Well, I don't know. There's been 18.4 million viewers of the new Roseanne, which is all about politics. So maybe I'm wrong, but in the 90s, what you wanted from a sitcom.
In the 90s, it was not cool to be into politics at all. No one wanted to talk about it. I grew up being told never talk about politics. And now it's like, it's all we ever fucking do.
Yeah.
So,
Right, definitely.
Yeah, and I just think
It
that was
also
not one of
wasn't-
the ways they pushed the envelope.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. It didn't fit that well with their aesthetic.
No.
Things were like a lot less polarized in America at the
Clinton
time.
years.
politically. Like, I mean, yeah, there was definitely, like, with Clinton, especially, like, the whole investigation
Monica
and
Lewinsky.
impeachment. Yeah. So there
Policy-wise, though, not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like, it really was a much more, like, centrist, moderate culture until probably
The
the
Bush
election of
years
George
changed
W.
a
Bush.
lot. Yeah, changed
Yeah.
a lot in the U.S. In my opinion. But
And then it kind of flipped. But I remember, like, nobody, also I was a child, but, like, nobody really talked about politics. And
No.
then all of a sudden Bush happened, and then it was kind of like it is now.
and all of us were getting into politics at 12,
That
13
age.
I
years.
suppose, yeah, it's
So-
also our age group, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Interesting.
There's no way to end that conversation, really. Okay, so do you have a favourite episode or particular writing joke from the show that is when you think of it, you go, that's the one that's like epic.
It sets it apart from like, why Frasier is at the top.
The ironing scene.
It is.
Yeah.
It's so good.
I think that was our first pick as well. Like you could show that to anyone in any country, and it is just 15.
And it's so funny.
15
There's
minutes.
there's no speech in it, right? It's totally just
no line.
physical comedy. Yeah, it's so good.
It's which is weird that we're talking about writing.
Right.
But I
Well, for
suppose,
us, yeah.
it's
that would still have to be written down as actions on a script. Yeah. Not everything is about dialogue.
Not at all. But what are you? So in terms of sitcoms, sorry.
Sorry, did you say you got a different
I'm just
one?
saying I don't even know what I just love this show so much. Pretty much any episode where Daphne's mom is there, I also love. I mean, any like Daphne family or Daphne heavy episodes are going to be some.
But yeah, when Daphne gets fed up, kind of anything. I love Niles. Anything with Niles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's.
Yeah.
I think we've almost kind of skirted around Daphne a bit because we've focused on the kind of Frasier and Niles, but I don't know.
She's
kind
brilliant.
of brings because we were talking about that Frasier and Niles are pretentious. You laugh at them because they're almost taking fun out of that. Marty and Roz bring that blue collar kind of aesthetic of realism, down to earth. Actually, think about what you're saying.
Relatable characters.
Yeah, and then Daphne just brings something.
Just a bit of an oddity. But that's nice. Yeah,
it's almost surreal humor a lot of the time. Yeah.
She's a really great mix of being like the straight man kind of in a comedic bit, but also very quirky sometimes. In a little bit of like a Phoebe way from Friends.
Yeah.
Very much.
And she kind of ping pongs back and forth between those two roles, being like super down to earth, normal, like what the joke is playing off of, being kind of like the audience member, and then sometimes just being really quirky and weird and funny.
And I think that I liked how her character was written because on the surface she is I think, portrayed to be a little bit, Daphne Moon. She's like hippy dippy. She's psychic, like all these things. But she's actually highly emotionally intelligent in ways that Niles and Frasier are not at all.
Well, she is a little bit psychic.
She provided like so much empathy and emotional connection and understanding and like ability to communicate in a thoughtful way that these men were never able to master. And she was considered like such an unintelligent person, but in reality, she was navigating, daily life in a much more effective way than either of them ever did, just because she was like a more fully functioning normal human person in terms of her emotions and her ability to just do her thing every day.
Absolutely.
So I always really loved that about her too.
Yeah, I think interesting fact what you just mentioned about Phoebe. Did you know that she was meant to be Lisa Kudrow was originally cast as Roz?
No way.
Yep, I've heard that.
And it would
I'm really glad that didn't pan out.
It actually was the same time around Friends, so she pulled out because of Friends.
She pulled out because of Friends, and Roz was I think she was a producer, or she wasn't an actor at the time. She was just picked out of that, and she just owns that character.
Oh, she's so good.
Her voice is so iconic too.
Yeah,
I love her.
She's in that role.
Yeah, and she was really unique on telly. Like, there wasn't really anyone else who was really doing that role.
No, and no one who even looked like her.
Yeah.
Like Roz is very beautiful and like fit, but she's also, I always felt like I was seeing someone who looked more and acted more like me on screen when Roz was in a scene. And I think that that's really powerful for women in a way that maybe we didn't even pay attention to.
Yeah, it was like a subconscious thing, but
and especially by comparison to like what Kenyon was saying earlier about the fleeting cameo roles of these like busty size -10 blondes that were dating Frasier in particular throughout the series, and then you just had this like real what appeared to the every woman, a real woman on screen in Roz who was willing to speak her mind and like wear clothes that made her feel good and not put up with a man's bullshit. And she was she looked like she could fill a shirt and a pair of pants, and it like she was still beautiful. She wasn't like, it's so funny to think of her as like the full-figured woman by the standard.
Stunning.
She's tiny. Like she is a toothpick of a woman, but in comparison to a lot of what we're used to seeing on screen, these like tall blonde model types, it felt like she just represented more of like the average American adult woman on screen, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting point, and I think hitting on that, talking about Daphne and Roz, is great in that there was a good balance in gender mainly. However, diversity in the show as a whole is...
I'm struggling to think of
I think
anyone.
Cam who's the upstairs neighbour,
he's the only black character.
But he only comes in, I think, season 11, I think it is. It's like the last season.
Or maybe 4 episodes.
Yeah. And
occasional baristas.
Yeah.
No, there's no intersectionality in this show. And there really wasn't in a lot of these shows from the 90s.
Absolutely.
But also, I don't think, in a way, I don't want to justify it, but I'm probably sounding like I am kind of, in their lives as people at that point, they probably wouldn't, because they were so privileged.
They had mobile phones in 1994. Who had a mobile then? Sorry, cell phone.
I mean, could have been, I think it would have been realistic to have more Asian characters.
Yeah.
Which there were pretty much zero, even though Seattle has like a big Asian population.
So it's not really reflective of the actual city it's supposed to be in. Right.
Yeah, but otherwise, I don't know. Again, it was of its time, kind of, and that doesn't excuse it. But hindsight is 20/20, kind of.
Yeah. I really liked what you said earlier about like shows that feel woke now and how they're going to age in 20 years, and that made me feel really optimistic. It made me feel like really like, I love the idea that we'll have moved even further forward.
I hope so.
I love Modern Family. That's one of my favorite shows.
Yeah.
And thinking about like they've done a lot to normalize, gay relationships in particular. I'm just wondering like what in that show 10 years from now will be like, oh my God, that was so embarrassing for our entire culture.
Well, in that show, there's a lot of jokes about Sofia Vergara, being Latina.
And just a lot of white people.
Yeah.
A lot of white people.
I think, and I love Modern Family too, but it's kind of that whole Will and Grace thing where it's like, yes, we're talking about gay rights, and yes, we're talking about gay issues, but we're also talking about gay rights and gay issues from the lens of a cisgendered white gay man, and their relationships with who have access to wealth and privilege, and while their privilege may be slightly less than a heterosexual gay man, they still have
heterosexual
gay man, heterosexual white man. They still have an enormous amount of privilege.
Absolutely.
So I mean, it's part of the reason why, like, is Grey's Anatomy inherently a well-written show? Not even a little bit. But do I love the fact that Shonda Rhimes still pushes to make sure that there's every representation of human being? Like, there are trans characters on that show. There are gay characters on that show. There are characters of every race, religion, and creed on that show. You can see someone who looks and thinks like you on Grey's Anatomy doing insane shit in a hospital that would never fucking happen in a million years. sooner than a lot of Americans can see themselves on Modern Family.
That's very true.
About the everyday American family. The everyday American family doesn't look like that necessarily anymore.
No.
And it hasn't for a while.
And like, even though they're casting light on certain things that need to be discussed, it's in the context of something that's not super progressive.
Exactly. So it's like, I love those shows too, but I think those are the conversations that we're going to be continuing to have, 10 years down the road, where it's like, Modern Family was great. I would have loved to have seen like a trans woman of color having a problem on that show.
Yeah. And
also, just beyond the representation issue, I think there will be other things in terms of humor, and also like the way the characters are structured that we'll probably think are pretty outdated in 10, 20 years, just by, just because we
well,
will.
And Trump will be long dead by then, so.
Gotta hope.
When you look at how far we've come since Frasier, when you look at even the discussions we're having about Modern Family, like, they don't shame as much in the later seasons about her. In the first few seasons, Sofia Vergara, they're constantly saying about how she was growing up killing a man, and I used to take
or making jokes about how they can't understand her.
And it's actually changed a little bit, and her character's changed and progressed and become far more, I don't know, but hopefully far more relatable to people rather than being this stereotype. And I think stereotypes are really, really common in sitcoms. We go back through all of them.
Of course.
They rely on those tropes.
But
100%.
Well,
it's an
it's
easy
currency.
way out.
It's easy. I mean, it's
It's the easiest thing to write. Like, we're screenwriters. Writing a stereotype is piss easy. Writing a difficult, nuanced joke about two people that maybe aren't the common types is far harder, but
it's actually far more satisfying when you go, I found something different to say here. I'm not just going to rely and fall back on what people expect, because what's the fun in that? Like, you just, no one wants to see that or hear that. It's all about, surely everything's about finding something fresh and new.
Yeah.
So why would you ever
I imagine that's really hard for writing for TV, because it's such a shorter turnaround time.
Yeah,
like, I think it's probably easier to have more nuanced characters in a movie, even though you have less time to develop them, in terms of screen time, but like infinitely more time to write it.
Yeah, it's a series of short arcs rather than one long. Yeah.
So apart from Modern Family, is there anything else you're watching, like sitcom-wise, at the moment that's modern? Obviously, Will and Grace was not a recommendation from Amanda there.
I guess I don't watch a ton of sitcoms right now. I mean, I watch a ton of TV, but like the show that I love is The Americans, which is not a sitcom.
Lucy and I really love that show on HBO, Insecure.
Oh, we didn't get that either.
That's a really great show. And then High Maintenance is really great.
Oh yeah, we love High Maintenance.
Love that show. I love how they structure that too, where you're meeting all these people just because they're people that he, brings marijuana to, but it's like you're getting these little shallow but like very heartwarming and sometimes heartbreaking dives into these people's everyday lives. It's so well done. It's so smart.
I think
that's a really good concept.
Yeah.
Fun fact about High Maintenance: there was a recent episode where there were all those drag queens, and they were singing that. I forgot what song they were singing, but one of them was like wearing this super elaborate headdress, and he was all painted like sparkly blue. Something happened, like somebody
is choking in the corner store.
Yeah, and he like stabbed a pen in his throat or in somewhere to like
he's a doctor. He tricked him.
Yeah, but that person, that character, is a drag queen in real life who does design those headpieces and is also an actual doctor. Like that character was 100% based on reality.
Wow.
And it was such a weird twist in that episode. We're like, what the fuck just happened? And it's completely authentic, and I fucking love it.
I love that.
But
that's amazing.
And I think that's a really good benchmark of the different people they've had on that. And it feels real. It feels like you actually know these types of people. They don't feel like they're
playing characters.
Yeah, it's like, that's a TV lesbian couple. No, it's like, actually, we know a lesbian couple that are very into their sustainable green, and there are so many.
Also a stereotype.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, but they did it.
There are ones that we know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, based in a little truth.
If you're gonna have a stereotype about you, like combating global warming is a pretty good one to have.
Yeah,
I'm happy with that one.
There are super damaging ones, and then there are ones that are, a little more positive. Still not fact. Still not, you can't extrapolate to everyone, but yeah.
Yeah.
High Maintenance is a little bit like a sitcom in that it doesn't necessarily progress as a storyline episode to episode. It's just one contained thing.
It just follows a formula each week.
And I think
I've never heard of this show.
Oh, it's so good. I think you'd actually really like it.
Start
it's on HBO.
Right from the beginning. It's so good.
It used to be a web series, and now it's
HBO.
Is it HBO? Okay, yeah.
But I think, why is that wrong that the sitcom can actually change? Like, we don't have to make something in the vein of All in the Family anymore. We've had that for 40, 50 years. And it's what we're realising in the UK. We had exactly the same as you in the 90s of these bored, done things like Keeping Up Appearances and
My Family.
They were just, you've seen them so many fucking times already. And they just keep making them. And then something comes along that's fresh, like Ricky Gervais with The Office in late 90s. That was not a ratings hit. They had to re-screen it a year down the line.
Was everyone cottoned on?
Yeah, it was not a big... Now it's this massive success that's all over the world. And so it has to have the time to actually go, oh yeah, we do want something different. And I think
we just want to be
like,
prepared to want something different.
Something like High Maintenance is perfect in an age where people do watch YouTube videos and they can't sit down and watch half an hour series. They want a quick 10-minute bite. Some of those early web series are like 10 minutes and stuff. And it's great. Like that's what the future should be, of changing it and making sitcoms something new.
Yeah, The Good Place is doing a good job of kind of fucking with the
I
formula
watched
as
that.
well.
Yeah. We like my fiance and I like The Good Place. I think I don't know how long it's going to be able to last, just given
I feel like that.
the plot of it.
Right.
Like I want all those same characters, but like doing something else now.
Something different,
like enough with like the whole context of the show.
I think Frasier will keep its crown of 11 seasons. I don't think many other sitcoms are
Modern
good.
Family, I think, has been going 10 years now.
Is it?
Isn't it?
Okay, Modern Family.
It's been on for a long
Modern Family could
it's been on for a while.
But I think that kind of long-running show, I don't think there's going to be... I don't know, maybe.
Well, because we're going a lot more high concept as well these days. So, as you say, like things like The Good Place and stuff, they don't have the longevity. That's not a negative thing. I quite like it when people have a plan with their show and they just go, and this is where we're going to end it.
2 seasons, I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great for The Good Place. Just tie it off, nice little bow.
Yeah.
I used to watch Big Bang Theory, which I'm almost like ashamed to admit.
Admit that.
Get off the podcast.
I mean, I haven't watched it in years, but I definitely enjoyed it for a while. I don't know. I thought it was what's his name?
It fitted
Sheldon
into,
was very funny.
Yeah, it fitted into that slot of what you want, what you had before,
yeah.
what you expected from a sitcom,
Right.
of privileged white men doing down women and basically living their privilege. But you don't realise it when you're watching it at first, and it's only when you kind of suddenly start to realise, hang on, why am I...
Weird that they play the victim so much that you start and then they go, hang on a second, like, you guys...
You're just dicks.
Sometimes you're just dicks,
You're just
100%.
You might be geeks, but you're still dicks.
We definitely grew up around a lot of geeky guys, maybe not in the exact same type of geekiness, but I was definitely for a while like that girl that hung out with a large group of total
nerdy boys.
Nerds.
Yeah, definitely, that was our thing. That was our harem.
Yeah.
I can relate.
Harem.
Look, I'm
taking an improv class.
As a white male middle class nerd who reads comics and watches sci-fi,
we would have been friends in middle school.
Yeah, completely.
I'm
taking an improv class right now, and everyone in our class, except for me and two other girls, are like kind of sweaty, nerdy guys. I'm like, I am in my element.
I know exactly how to relate to you.
Yeah. Love it.
But yeah, it's well, I think that's a pretty vast array of stuff that we've covered.
Yeah, we covered a lot.
What were we talking about, Frasier?
Okay, so where can people find you guys online and elsewhere, I guess, in the real world?
Yeah, you can go to our website, which is wineandcrimepodcast.com, and learn some cool stuff about us and check out our merch and all that fun stuff. But we're on like every podcasting platform. So if you have Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, Google Play, yeah, you can find us on SoundCloud. There are lots of cool ways you can find us. We also are obnoxiously active on social media. So you should check us out at Wine and Crime Pod on all three main platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hopefully we can get a really cool like LinkedIn following somewhere down the road.
Oh, yeah.
Like the Archie Bunker sitcom, I kind of feel like LinkedIn might be on its way out.
I feel it's for a certain person.
We'll get a Google Plus account.
Unwoke.
Talking about Wine and Crime merch, your t-shirts are everything.
We love them.
We are definitely huge fans. And so what have you guys got coming up?
We just wrapped up a live show in Minneapolis. So we've had like a lot.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're really excited about all of it. Just getting out and meeting people and networking, and we've got a lot of cool stuff in the works. So keep an eye on the website because there are some fun announcements coming down the pipeline that we can't give you now.
But if you live on the East Coast of the United States, stay tuned.
Yeah.
We definitely will be, even though we don't live on the East Coast of the States.
Easter egg, because we're recording this at Easter.
We highly recommend your podcast. It's so fun to listen to. You guys make it, like, obviously the stories are insightful and interesting in the crime, like true crime kind of way, but you guys as hosts absolutely nail it. It's so much fun. It's like hanging out with friends. And now we've done it in IRL, in real life.
We're homies for life now.
It's as amazing as we thought it would be.
When we launch our UK tour, we'll just come stay with you and have you.
Definitely do a
Brighton
show.
invitation.
As long as you can put up with cats, annoying little cats, then
love cats.
But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this today. And
thank you.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Keep up the good work, you guys, and have us back again, please. This was so much fun, and we watch way too much television.
All right, can't wait to go back and watch some more Frasier.
Yeah, we gotta go.
All over my damn face.
I'm trying
to. Baby, I hear the news are calling to salad and scrambled eggs.
Quite stylish.
Yeah.